This is Gemara in Kesubos, Daf Nun Gimel. All the learning for this month, the Good and Chodesh for the month of Elul, has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, as lezchot neshama for Reyzel Bas Mair, whose yahrzeit is tomorrow on the 2nd of Elul. Amir Tashem, the learning the entire Chabura should bring Reyzel Bas Mair to an higher place in Ganin Shamayla, and should be a tremendous Milat Yosher for the family and for the entire Chabura. We're holding 5 lines from the bottom of Nun Beis Min Beis, and the truth is, just one point to add on. We started discussing yesterday this concept of Kesubos Benin Dechrin, the Ksuba of the male children. This is something that we began about 10 lines off at the bottom, a din in the Mishnah, just to take one moment to explain what exactly this means in a little bit more depth, based on Rashi. Is what's going on over here is what would happen if one's wife dies before him? So the husband, of course, inherits the entire property. The husband gets the entire property, including the ksuba, everything that was written. So what's the point that Chazal said that the husband has to write something special for the sons? Says the Gemara, says Rashi explains this concept of Kesubos Benin Dechrin is because there were many fathers that didn't want to give large dowries for their daughters. Because what were they nervous about? That what happens, they gave a large dowry for their daughter, and ultimately, let's say their daughter dies first. Now that entire piece of field, where does it go? Goes to the husband, and it's lost from their family. And therefore, people were reluctant to write large ksuba for their daughter. So what do they do because of that? The Rabbanan came along and they made a takana that there's always going to be part that goes to the sons of this woman. So let's say Reuven's writing a large dowry to his daughter Sarah. Even if Sarah dies and everything goes to her husband, Reuven's son-in-law, but there will always be one portion that will go to Sarah's sons, which is Reuven's grandchildren, and thereby this field, this dowry, will always remain within the power and the possession of Reuven's family. So this creation of Kesubos Benin Dechrin was made that a husband says to his wife, I'm going to give part to your sons, to our sons, so that the father, when he writes over the dowry, will ensure that he writes over a nice dowry. That's the creation of the Kesubos Benin Dechrin. So now says the Gemara, 5 lines to the bottom, what's the reason that v'tigvei mimetaltali? We learned 2 days ago that the sons, when the way that they collect is Kesubos Benin Dechrin, is they only collect from karka. Ask the Gemara, why don't they get from metaltali? Says the Gemara, ki ksuba shavi rabbanan. The reason is because Chazal determined that the Kesubos Benin Dechrin is the same status as the ksuba, which you only get from karka. Ask the Gemara, Titrev Mimishabdi. So says the Gemara, why aren't you able to get from fields which are Mishubadim, fields which were sold, you should be able to collect that as well. Answers the Gemara, the highlighting is not working today, Yarton Tanan. The Mishnah said that they inherit as a din of a Yerusha. And since as a din of a Yerusha, you do not get, if it was sold prior, you do not get from Mishubadim. Ask the Gemara further, says the Gemara, say that the sons are able to collect the ksuba even though there is not moiser dinner, even if there is not the surplus of a dinner. This is a din that's going to come along in about a month and a half's time. Rashi says that the sons only get to this Kesubos Benin Dechrin if there's something left over in the ksuba. So ask the Gemara why. Explains the Gemara, but makom dekama akri nachla daraisa loy takino rabbanan. In a place where they are getting rid of a din daraisa, therefore the rabbanan did not allow for a din darabanan, and therefore, since on the daraisa level they all have to split it equally, we're not going to allow them to get unless everyone gets something, and therefore only if there's going to be a moiser dinner will this din of the Kesubos Benin Dechrin kick in. Says the Gemara, let's tell you a story, 3 lines on the bottom. Rababa Yasik Lelebrei Be'Abba Surya. Rababa was engaged in marrying off his son to the house of Abba Surya. So Rababa went to Abba Surya's house to write a ksuba. Shama Yehuda Bar Meimar. So Yehuda Bar Meimar heard Rababa's in town, and Nafik, and he went out to greet Rababa. Also Yehuda left his house, And he came and they walked together to the house of Abba bar Surya. Kimat lepischa. When they got to the entrance of Abba bar Surya, have come iftar minei. So this Yehuda bar Merimar, he just came out to greet the Gadol Adar Rav Papa. Now he's going to go home when Rav Papa got to the house of Abba bar Surya. So Amar Lei, Rav Papa says to him, Neimel Mar Badei. Says Rav Papa, I don't understand. Why don't you come into the house with me as we turn over to Negimel Amid Aleph? Says the Gemara, Rav Papa saw Chazia Delo Avim Nichalei. Rav Papa saw that Yehuda bar Merimar didn't want to go in with him. Amar Lei, Rav Papa says, Mai Daitoch. What's the reason you don't want to come to the house with me? Misham da Amar Lei Shmuel, Rav Yehuda's reason because Shmuel taught Rav Yehuda Shina Yisharbon Lo Tavi Ba'uda Ba'avurei Achsanta Filu Mibra Bisha Lebra Tava. The reason is because of the statement of Shmuel that you should not be around when an inheritance is being given away, even from a bad son to a good son. You should never be there whenever there is a transfer of ownership of inheritance. Why? Because very good that this kid is a better kid and that kid's not as good a kid, but you never know who's going to come out of him. So Shmuel at one point said to Rabbi Yehuda, don't be around whenever inheritance is transferring possession. Certainly not. You shouldn't be around when there's a change of possession from a son to a daughter. So our Papa says, to this Yehuda bar Merimar is the reason why you don't want to come in with me, because of this statement that you don't want to be around whenever there's a transfer of ownership and you know I'm about to write for the daughter. So maybe that's the reason. So says Rav Papa, but don't be worried. Hainami takanta d'Rabbanani. This fact that I'm writing over to the daughter is the takana d'Rabbanan. The Amar Rav Yechon Rishim Bar Yochai Amar Lei. As if Yechon said the name of Rishim Bar Yochai. Excuse me, not Amar Lei. As if Yechon said the name of Rishim Bar Yochai, that you're allowed to write over a dowry for your daughter. That was the creation of the whole Kesubos bin Indichron, was to ensure that there's a dowry to the daughter. So says Rav Papa to Yehuda bar Merimar, come, you can come inside with me. So Amar Le, Yehuda bar Merimar says, Hani mili midaita lasuye nami. That's only when you're writing it with your own das, you're writing it consensually. Lasuye nami. But to force the father to write such a dowry is the same halacha. Amar Le, Rav Papa says back, Atomika mina lach da'il v'asuye. Who told you that I'm forcing Abba bar Merimar to write a dowry? Meaning Rav Papa was going in, Abba bar Merimar was the one that was marrying off his daughter. Said Rav Papa, why are you assuming that this Abba does not want to write over the possessions to his daughter? Oh, v'lo ta'isi kamina. Go in, don't force. Who said that you should force this Abba bar Merimar? I never said that, says Rav Papa. Should come in, but don't force him to write the dowry as well. Continues the Gemara. Amar Le, Yehuda bar Merimar says, Maila didi hainu asiyeh. Just me going inside is tantamount to forcing. Said Yehuda bar Merimar, I understand what my clout is, and if I go in to the house of Abba Surya automatically is going to feel forced to write a larger dowry just because I'm there. Achbe va'ol, Rav Papa persuaded Yehuda bar Merimar, and eventually he went into the house of Abba Surya. Ishtik, and as he was there, Yehuda sat silently, v'yasef, and he sat, he didn't say anything. So Savar, Abba Surya thought, he thought, why is Yehuda bar Merimar sitting quietly? Must be because he's angry. I didn't write a big enough dowry. So Abba Surya wrote everything that he had as a dowry. L'sof, at the end, Amar Le, after he wrote away everything, so Abba Surya says to Yehuda bar Merimar, even now you're not going to talk to me. I wrote away everything. I make a shvua demar lo shviki midil nafshei. I left not over nothing for myself. I wrote over everything to my daughter. So Amar Le, so Yehuda bar Merimar says, if you want my opinion, I would not even tell you to write that amount. Amar Le, so Abba Surya realized, hey, I wrote everything away because I thought that Yehuda bar Merimar was pushing me to do it. Now that I know that he's not pushing me, he says, can I back out? Amar Le, I don't want to make you into a person that backs out. And here we see a bunch of incredible details We see how this din of the Kesubos B'nei the din of writing a Kesubah to the daughter, is a real tekana to Rabban. Now, this last detail that he said, I don't want to make you to someone who backs out. So for a moment, I know it's late, but if you look at the top Tosfos points out that there's a concept that when it comes to everything with regard to Kedushin, words have binding power. So Tosfos says, I don't understand. When it comes to Kedushin, everything that you say is automatically binding. So what's the reason over here? He said, I don't want to make you into someone who backs out. It should seemingly be halachically binding. So Tosfos says, no, that's only when you get up at the time of the Kedushin and you say, I'm giving such and such. This was prior, that's one shot. Second shot in Tosfos is that they already did the Kedushin and this was afterwards. But regardless, that's the story of Abba Surya and Yehuda bar Merimah. Continues the Gemara, another halacha of the Kesubos B'nei about 20 lines down. The first word online is Adrana. Ba'i minei Rav Yimar Saba mi Rav Nachman. Rav Yimar Saba asked Rav Nachman, Machra Kesubas l'bayla yesh Kesubos B'nei Dechrin ayin Kesubas Dechrin. What is the story? If a woman sells her Kesubah to her husband, she tells her husband that in the event that I predecease you, you do not have to give anything to my children. In the event that you divorce me, you don't have to pay me anything. She sells her rights excuse me, of the Kesubah to her husband. So ask the Gemara, what about this special takana, this special din that we want to make sure that the sons always get something? Does she still get that? Do the sons still get that even after she gave away the entire Kesubah? So Amar Le Rava, says Rava, why are you asking a case where she gave and sold the Kesubah to her husband? Why don't you ask a case and she was Meichel, she forgave the Kesubah to her husband, which is a more common case. It's more common for a woman to tell her husband, I don't think I'll predecease you, I'm not worried about getting divorced, I'm Meichel the Kesubah. It's not so normal for a woman to sell her Kesubah to her husband, so why don't you ask that case? So Amar Leis, Rav Yimar Saba asked Rava, I'm asking you about selling. And when it comes to selling, there's a svara to say why a woman would sell her Kesubah. She has no cash. Money forced her financial concerns. As I say, it's as if someone hit her 100 times. She needs the cash. You want me to ask a question about Meicheles? So about her forgiving the Kesubah? So Amar Rava says back, Shitali, it's obvious to me, it's posh, it says Rava, that if she sells her Kesubah, she does not lose the right to Kesubas B'nei Dechrin. My taima, what's the reason? That the only reason she sold the Kesubah was because she had no money. It's not that she was belittling the Kesubah. It's not that she didn't want her children to get anything. She had no cash, so she sold her Kesubah. But her sons, why should they lose out? And similarly, if she forgives her Kesubah to her husband, then, not similarly, if she forgives her Kesubah to her husband, in that case she does not get Kesubas B'nei Dechrin. My taima, what's the reason? Because by the mere fact that she forgave her Kesubah, she forgives everything. So Rava wants to differentiate, and in the case of selling your Kesubah, the children still get the Kesubas B'nei Dechrin, the male sons still get that portion, but if she forgave it, then they do not. So Rava asked a similar shayla, what if she sells the Kesubah? Sounds like a very similar case. But the difference over here is she didn't sell the whole thing. She sold the Kesubah for a very minimal price, just enough to get by. So in that case, asks the Gemara, is that the same status as selling it to someone else? Or is it the same status as for giving it to her husband, and therefore the children would not get any more? So Basa Dabai, other Bashta after he asked the question, he answers, and the children would lose. And the children would not lose the Kesubas B'nei Dechrin. So Masar Rav Yidibar Avin, ask Rav Yidibar Avin, Mesa in Yershal Zavin Yershal Zay Yershik Kesubasa. What happens if she dies. Some people take out the word Mesa. Then ain't Yarsha Shal Zev, and Yarsha Zeh, Yarshik Suba. Neither he nor she, we'll see what this is referring to. It's referring to a Mishnah in Yavamas, which we've learned already, referring to a case that a woman remarries. There's an Eid Echad that comes and says her husband died, a very lengthy sugya that we learned in Yavamas, and this woman believes the Eid Echad, and she goes and she remarries, and she has a son, and lo and behold, what happens one day? Her original husband comes along. The halacha is she has to get divorced, and she loses her ksuba. So it says the Mishnah over there that in Yarshal Zevi, Yarshal Zeh, Yarshik Subasa, neither the sons in the first marriage nor the sons in the second marriage inherit Ksuba. And we wondered and we pondered about that Mishnah. Ksubasa Maya Vidite. What is the Ksuba talking about? The Mishnah said she loses her Ksuba. What's this extra emphasis that neither Yarshim get the Ksuba? V'amar Rapapa and Rapapa explain Ksuba has been in Dechrin. They're referring to the specific takana of the Ksuba has been in Dechrin. That's what we're referring to when we say that neither the first or the second Yarshim get the Ksuba. Explains the Gemara, it's not referring to the actual Ksuba. Because that earlier in the Mishnah we already spoke about. What's referring to? It's referring to this takana of the Ksuba has been in Dechrin. But ask the Gemara, Vamai, why do the sons lose the Ksuba? Why do we say in this case that it was a Yitzhar, she had a desire that forced her, meaning it's not her fault. Why did she get remarried? Because it was an Eid that came and said that her husband died. Answers the Gemara, you know why? It's a special taikana de Rabbanan. We learned this in Yavamis, a special kinas. We find her. Why do we give her a kinas? Because we know that if she knows she's going to eventually could potentially lose her entire ksuba, she won't be so quick to believe the testimony of an aid. She'll look into it much more thoroughly. Continues the Gemara, Yosef Rabin Bar Chanina Kamei Rav Chisda. 3 lines from the wide lines. Rabin Bar Chanina was sitting in front of Rav Chisda. Yosef Ikamar Mishmei Rav Eliezer. Meicheles Ksubas Labai La'ila Mezainis. If someone forgives the ksuba to her husband, she does not get supported, even if the husband were to die. She waived all the rights of ksuba. She does not get supported. So Amar Lei. So Rav Chisda responded, he loved the Kamar Li Mishmei Digav Rabba, not for the fact that he said this over in the name of a great person, Rav Elazar. Hava Amina Lacha. You know what I've said to you? If you pay good with evil, evil will not leave your house, and really she should not lose her mezainis, her support. But because you said over the name of Rav Elazar, I'll forgive you for lack of a better word, but I will. You will listen to your din. So Yosef Rav Nachman v'Ula v'Avimi bar Rabba Yosef Chiv Rabbi Gavayu Asa Ahu Gavra. So these great people were sitting, and a certain man came in front of them. The Shchiva Arus Asai, whose Arusa had died, came and Amrulei, and so all these Gedalim said to this man, Zil Kvar Ayhavla Ksubasa. Even though you only did Eris and you never consummated the marriage, they told him either go bury her or you have to give her Ksuba. We know, as we've learned previously, that once one gets married, he has a chiv to bury her. But in this story, they said to this man, even though you only did Erisin, go bury her or give her a ksuba. Amrli Rav Chia, said Rav Chia Tanina, we already learned in our Braisa that what? Ishta arusa lo yoinin v'lo mitamela v'chini lo yinaz lo mitamela mesa eina yarsha mesu kavik subasa. So what do we see in this Mishnah? We see that our Rusa, they only did Eiris and they do not have all the halachas. Time of the Mesu explains the Gemara. Ha Mesahi, if she died, ein la ksuba, she would not get the ksuba. My time, what's the reason that he would not have to bury her if she's only in Arusa? Because we don't apply the end of the Mishnah. That if you marry someone else, you'll get what's written over here. So says the Gemara, it's incorrect what these Gedalim said, and if one only does Erisin, she is not entitled to the Ksuba, and by extension, he would not have to bury her. Explains the Gemara further, once we're on the topic of Erisin, Gyasa, Rabin, Amar, Shlakish, on the last line, Arusa, Shemesa, Ein La Ksuba. Similar halacha, an Arusa that dies, she does not get the Ksuba, she doesn't get buried. Amrle Abaye, Zil Amrulei, Abaye says, go and tell Rabin as we turn over to Nun Gimel Amid Beis, Shakilu Tevuzach, Shadi Achizri. Tell Rabin to take your good things that you're telling me and throw it onto thorns. We already knew this halacha. You're not telling me any chiddush. So we continue on in Gimel Amud Beis, 2 lines down, quoting the Mishnah, in which we felt after dealing with the Kesubos bin Derchon for the sons. Then the Mishnah said, that the female children that you're going to have, they'll always live in my house, they'll always be supported. Even if the wife dies first, he'll support the daughters all the way. So it's Rav Tani ad tilchan leguvrin, Levi Tani ad tigavrun. Until what point is a man obligated to support the daughters of his wife? Says Rav, until they get married. Says Levi, until they reach the age of Bagares, which we know is 12 and a half years old. Explains the Gemara, L'Rav afal gav de Bagar. Rav says that it's a marriage, meaning even if they're 12 and a half years old, says Rav, no, you have to keep on supporting them until they get married. But Levi afal gav de insif. And according to Levi, let's say she got married at 11 and a half. You still have to support her until she comes 12 and a half. So it says, meaning that's a kasha. Says the Gemara, it sounds like Rav and Levi's opinions are mutually exclusive. So I ask the Gemara, is that true? According to Rav, even if she's 12 and a half, according to Levi, even if she's ready to Nisuin, is that accurate? Ask the Gemara, that you still have to support them? Ella says the Gemara, no, that's not Pshat and Rav and Levi. Bagar v'lo yinsiv, insiv v'lo bagar t'kliyam v'lo pligi. If either they got married Nisuin or they're 12 and a half years old, everyone agrees they have to be supported. Ki pligi, what is this machlaik as Rav and Levi? Ba'arusa v'lo bagar. In the scenario in which there's erusin before she reaches Bagrus. In that case, Rav says she's called married and you don't support her. Levi says, no, you have to wait until she's a proper Bagaris. Levi Masita, we learned the same thing in a Mishnah, 10 lines down. Until they become Bagaris, and they reach their time, they enter into Nisuin. So what do we see? We see that Levi agrees in reality. Once there's Nisuin, she doesn't get supported. However, Levi does not agree that it would happen with Erisin. Ask the Gemara, Tarti, based on what you just said, do you need both? Do you need that she becomes 12 and a half years old and she gets Nisuin? Elo says the Gemara, no, either she becomes 12 and a half years old, or she becomes to the point of Leinsava, she comes into Nisuin. Either one is the point to which the husband does not have to support her anymore. Says the Gemara, this machlokes Rav and Levi Ketanoi is indeed machlokes Tanoi that we learned in a Braysa and Mosai Abbas Nizainis until when is the daughter supported at Shataris until she gets Erisin. Shemar Lezer Oimir ad Sheti Bagar until there's a Bagros. So what do we see? We see Levi holds like Rav Elazar that you have to wait till Bagares, Erisin is not enough, whereas Rav would hold like the Tanakama that Erisin would be enough and she would no longer receive support. Tani Rav Yosef ad Havon, so Rav Yosef learned ad Havon until there be in the state of marriage. So they asked this Rav Yosef, what did Rav Yosef mean? He said until they will be till Havyon in marriage. What's Havyon? Erisin on Nisuin. Explains the Gemara. Teiku, no answer. Did you hear? What's the halacha? Does an arusa receive mizayna support from the father's estate or not? Amar Lei responded, Mashma lo shmili. I didn't hear anything. Misvara leslach. But I'll tell you that misvara, she should not, less law, she does not receive support once she has Erisin. Why? Once she does Erisin, once she receives Erisin, her husband, her future husband, it was not going to want her to get degraded by begging for food, so he's going to be the one to support her. So the father does not have to support her anymore. So ask Rav Chisda Amar Lei, if you didn't hear anything, and you're only telling me misvara, you know what? I can argue on you misvara. Since she's not yet with her husband, he won't support her for nothing. So machlokes that if we don't have an explicit din that they heard from the Rebbe, misvara, we can argue both ways. Vikad Yamri says we can say the opposite. Amar lei mashval shmili misvara isla. The Rav Chisda said Misfar she should get. Why? She should get from the father's estate. She's not getting the husband's property. And Amar Lei. And in this version, Rav Chisda responds back to Rav Yosef, I could argue on the opposite svara. And we continue today's shir, beginning the next sugya, Siman de Garvi Sak Saraf, Maniv Yimra Shniya, Arusa Vansa. That's mnemonic that's going to have 5 shaylos that we're going to begin. Today we're going to learn about 2 of them. So, Bayi Minei Rav Sheshes, 20 lines in the bottom, the first one line is Sheshes. They asked from Rav Sheshes, Mima Enes, a Ketana, who her mother or brother married her off, and then she decides she doesn't want the marriage anymore, so she walks out of the marriage. Ask the Gemara, Yesh la mezaynais, oy ein la mezaynais. Does she continue receiving support from her father's estate or not? Amrlu Rav Sheshes Tanituah, bring your raya. Alman of Beisavia, Grusha Beisavia, V'shemeres Yavam Beisavia. All these girls, when they're in their father's house, Yesh la mezaynais. They get mezaynais. Rav Yehuda, depends whether they're in the father's house. Says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda is seemingly just repeating the same thing as the Tanakama, that it depends if you're in the father's house or not. You know what the machlekes Tanakama and Rav Yehuda is in a scenario where someone's partially in their father's house. She was married, but she walked out of that marriage. The Tanakama Savar Isla. The Tanakama holds that she will get support from the father's estate. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, no, she walked out. She already was married at some level. Less law, she no longer will get support from the father. And by Reish Lakish, one last shayla of the day, Bas Yavama Yishlam Mizanis Einlam Mizanis. What is the status? The daughter of Yavama, does she get supported from her father's estate, the estate of the Yavam or not? Do we say since the Kesubos goes on the first husband, she does not get? If there was none for the first, she gave from the second. Take you again. The Gemara does not have an answer where she gets supported from. We'll pick up for the next shayla in the next year. Emir Tzashem.